The sun had barely begun to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the distance, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the streets. Max, a golden retriever, lay in the front yard of his home, his tail wagging lazily as he watched his owner, Sarah, preparing dinner inside. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that seemed to promise no interruptions, just serenity. Sarah, sitting in the window, smiled at the sight of Max. He was her faithful companion, always by her side, ever ready to play fetch or simply relax with her after a long day. They had been through so much together. Sarah had rescued him as a pup from the shelter. And since that day, he had been her loyal friend, confidant, and protector. They shared a bond that was unspoken but understood deeply by both. Max's eyes were soft, content, as he lay in the grass, his thoughts drifting lazily like the clouds above. To him, life was simple. He had a routine, a life full of fetch, walks, food, and the occasional belly rub from Sarah. It was all he needed. Every day was a good day. As long as Sarah was near, she was his world, and he was hers. But today, something felt different. Max's ears twitched as he suddenly sat up, his nose lifting into the air. He sniffed the breeze, his instincts kicking in. It wasn't anything that Sarah could sense, but Max's heightened senses told him something was off. He looked toward the street, and there, walking down the sidewalk, was a man he didn't recognize. The man's stride was slow and deliberate, his eyes staring straight ahead as if in a daze. His clothes were old and ragged, and Max instinctively stood up, his body tense. Sarah, who had been cooking in the kitchen, glanced over at Max, noticing his sudden alertness. "What is it, boy?" she asked, sensing that something was out of the ordinary. Max turned to her, his gaze fixed on the man, his body still. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't explain why, but something about the stranger made her uneasy. The man's presence seemed to disturb the usual calm of their neighborhood, as though he didn't belong. She watched for a moment, her eyes narrowing. The man passed by without so much as a glance in their direction. Max, however, didn't look away. He kept his eyes trained on the man's back as he disappeared down the street. "He's probably just passing through," Sarah murmured to herself, trying to reassure herself. She'd seen all kinds of people walking by, but something about this man's posture, the way he moved, unsettled her. Max, still standing, let out a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Sarah pause. She walked over to the door, reaching down to gently pat his head. "Good boy," she said softly, but Max didn't relax. He kept his gaze on the street, his ears back, watching the shadows lengthen as the man continued down the block. As the evening wore on, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and purple. Sarah finished cooking and called Max inside, but he didn't move right away. He lingered in the yard, still staring down the street. "Max, come on," Sarah called again, her voice tinged with concern. She didn't know why, but the sight of Max standing there, staring at the empty street, made her uneasy. It wasn't just the strange man. It was the way Max had reacted. Dogs were perceptive creatures, their instincts far sharper than any humans. And Max's behavior was not typical. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but she couldn't explain why. Finally, after a moment, Max turned and padded slowly inside, his gaze still flicking to the window as he passed it. Sarah closed the door behind him, brushing aside the unsettling feeling that had lingered in her chest. Max settled down in his favorite spot by the fireplace, his head resting on his paws. But Sarah couldn't help but feel a tug in her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful life, so calm and predictable, was about to change. Max, too, seemed to sense it. He lay down, but his eyes stayed open, his gaze still fixed on the door. And just as Sarah started to relax again, she heard a faint sound in the distance. It was the sound of a dog barking sharp, frantic barks that were quickly followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. Max's head snapped up at the noise, his body tensing once again. It wasn't just any bark. It was the desperate bark of a dog in trouble. Max's ears perked up, and in that instant, he was on his feet, moving toward the door. The peaceful evening had been shattered, and neither Max nor Sarah knew it yet. But this was the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The days following that strange afternoon were filled with an unsettling stillness. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the brief encounter with the mysterious man, it was Max's behavior. He had always been protective, but never before had Sarah seen him so fixated, so alert to things she couldn't perceive. Every time Sarah went to check on him, he would be sitting by the window, staring out at the street, as though waiting for something or someone to return. Max's behavior became more than just curiosity. It was a silent warning that Sarah couldn't ignore. Though he was still the same loyal dog, there was something different about him. She thought it was perhaps just her imagination running wild. But when she went out for her daily errands, she noticed the same man again. This time, he wasn't walking aimlessly. He was standing on the corner of their street, his gaze fixed on Sarah's house. Sarah couldn't deny it any longer. Something was definitely wrong. Max was now no longer just a companion, he was a guardian. Sarah felt this deep down, but the constant fear nagged at her. What was Max sensing that she couldn't? Why had he become so vigilant? And then, the moment she dreaded came. One evening, Sarah returned home to find Max pacing in circles, his eyes wild with something primal. He hadn't been like this since the day he had escaped to follow her when they first moved. But this time, it wasn't a simple moment of disobedience. It felt like a deeper warning. The moment Sarah opened the door, Max bolted out past her, running into the street without hesitation. Panic surged in Sarah's chest as she followed him, calling out his name. "Max, come back," she shouted, but her voice was lost in the evening air. Max ignored her, his focus unwavering as he sprinted down the road. Sarah's heart raced as she tried to keep up, her legs burning as she watched Max run faster than she had ever seen him run before. He was heading straight for the edge of town, into the darker, quieter streets where no one was around. She had no idea what had triggered his sudden need to run, but she could see the urgency in every step he took. Something was pulling him forward, something only he could feel. As they reached the outskirts of town, Sarah slowed, gasping for breath. Max had stopped. His head turned toward the old park they had visited many times when he was younger, the place where they first took walks together. The park had long been abandoned, the gates rusted and barely standing, but Max stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the darkened area where the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. "Max," Sarah whispered, stepping forward cautiously. Max's tail was stiff, his hackles raised. He was staring at something or someone in the darkness of the park. The familiar sense of dread crept up Sarah's spine as she felt the weight of the moment. She had no idea what Max was sensing, but it was enough to fill her with an unease she couldn't explain. And then, from the deep shadows of the park, a familiar figure emerged. It was the man, the same stranger she had seen on the street days ago. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something that could have been madness or fear, perhaps both. He didn't seem to notice Sarah, his gaze fixed firmly on Max. The man's voice cracked as he spoke, his words laced with desperation. You still remember me." Max, in response, stepped forward cautiously, his stance defensive. He was clearly unsettled but unwilling to retreat. Sarah's heart pounded as she slowly approached, unsure of what was happening. The man's presence felt wrong, and Max's intense reaction to him only amplified the fear. She called out cautiously, "Who are you?" The man's eyes flicked to Sarah for a moment before returning to Max. His voice was shaking. I'm sorry. I never meant to abandon you." But it wasn't my fault. I had no choice. His eyes grew distant, his hands trembling at his sides. Max stepped forward once more, sniffing the air between them. There was a strange recognition in his gaze, something that spoke of a long-lost bond. He took a hesitant step toward the man, his movements slow and deliberate, as though unsure if he should trust the stranger in front of him. Max, Sarah whispered, unsure of what to make of the situation. Do you know him? The man lowered his head, a single tear slipping down his cheek. It's me, David. I was the one who raised you. Max, I was the one who left. And now I've come back for you. Sarah's mind reeled. David. The name echoed in her thoughts as pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began to fall into place. Max's sudden urgency, the way he had been acting so strange the past few days, it wasn't just some random change. He was searching for David. David's voice shook as he continued. I didn't want to leave you. Max, I had to move, and I couldn't take you with me. I thought I'd lost you forever, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. And when I heard about your rescue, I knew it was time to come back. Max's tail gave a tentative wag as he stepped closer to the man, his nose brushing against David's hand. The recognition in his eyes was undeniable. Sarah felt her chest tighten with emotion. The reunion was too much to process at once. Max had spent years searching for his owner, following the silent call of his heart. And now, after all this time, they were finally together again. It was as if the world had stopped for a brief moment, and Sarah watched in awe as the bond between Max and David unfolded before her eyes. The world had changed. The search, the longing, the pain, they were finally over. Max had found his owner again, and David, despite his painful past, had come back to the dog who had never given up on him. The joy that radiated between them was palpable, filling the empty spaces in Sarah's heart. Max had waited so long for this moment, and now that it was here, he didn't need to search anymore. He had found his home, his person, once again. Sarah stood back, quietly watching as Max and David shared a reunion filled with silent understanding. Max had done the impossible. He had found the one he loved, and in doing so, had proved that loyalty could never be measured by time or distance. Love, true love, always finds its way home. Max stood still, his body tense, eyes fixed on the man standing before him. The reunion he had yearned for, the search that had consumed him for years, had led him to this moment. The man, David, had returned. And yet, something about the encounter didn't feel entirely right. It was a reunion, yes, but it was also a confrontation. David's hands trembled as he reached out toward Max, his voice barely above a whisper. Max, it's really you. I never thought I'd see you again. Max took a cautious step forward, his instincts telling him to be wary, even as his heart recognized the man who had once been his everything. His mind flooded with memories, days spent playing together in the park, walks in the neighborhood, and the love that had been shared between them. But there was something unsettling about David now. His face was gaunt, his clothes ragged, and his eyes, though filled with longing, were also clouded with guilt and sorrow. Max had always been able to sense emotions deeply. And now, as he approached David, he could feel the weight of the years lost between them. The connection was still there, but it was strained. Sarah, standing a few steps behind Max, felt a deep sense of unease. She had seen the bond between Max and this man, but there was something else, something hidden beneath David's words and his tear-filled eyes. She had no idea what had happened between them, but she could sense the unspoken truth in the air. David, sensing Sarah's hesitance, took a step back, his eyes lowered to the ground, as if ashamed. I know you must have questions, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, but I never wanted to leave him. Sarah, I loved him more than anything. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to process the gravity of the situation. Max had been through so much. And now, here was this man, this figure from Max's past, claiming to be his owner. It was impossible to ignore the confusion that swirled in her mind. She needed answers. "David," she asked carefully, her voice steady, "what happened? Why did you leave Max? Why did you let him go?" David's shoulders slumped, and he looked up, his face filled with a mix of regret and pain. "I didn't have a choice. I had to move. For work, for reasons beyond my control. I thought it was better for Max to stay behind, to be with someone who could take care of him. But I was wrong. I made a mistake, and I've regretted it every day." Sarah's heart ached as she listened to David's words. She understood the difficult decisions people had to make, but the pain of abandonment was something different, something that Max had carried for years. She looked at Max, who was now sitting beside her, his eyes fixed on David, his tail wagging cautiously. David continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "Max has always been my best friend. I never thought I could be without him. But when I moved, everything fell apart. I lost touch with him, and no matter how hard I tried to find him, it was like he had disappeared. I never gave up hope, though. I couldn't. I kept thinking about him every single day." Max tilted his head, his expression softening. The recognition was undeniable. And yet, the years of separation had left an indelible mark on their relationship. The bond they once shared was still there, but it was complicated by the passage of time. Max's loyalty was unwavering, but his heart was conflicted. He had waited so long for this moment, but it didn't feel like the reunion he had imagined. Sarah, sensing the complexity of the situation, stepped forward. She gently placed a hand on David's arm, her voice calm but firm. "You can't just walk back into Max's life and expect everything to be as it was. He's been through so much on his own. And now, we need to figure out what's best for him." David nodded, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at Max. "I understand. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I don't even know if Max will remember me the same way, but I need him to know that I never stopped loving him. I've spent all this time searching for him, hoping to find him again." Max took a tentative step toward David, sniffing the air, his nose brushing against David's hand. It was a silent gesture, but to Sarah, it spoke volumes. Max had never been the type of dog to hold grudges, and his instincts were guiding him toward forgiveness. But this wasn't just about Max's loyalty. It was about rebuilding trust, about healing the wounds of separation. David knelt down slowly, his hand outstretched toward Max, who hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. The two shared a quiet moment, the years of absence melting away in that brief exchange. But as Sarah watched, she couldn't help but feel that this reunion, while powerful, was only the beginning of a much deeper journey. Max's eyes met Sarah's, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a sense of peace in him. He had found David again, but the road ahead was unclear. Max's loyalty had never wavered, but his heart, like Sarah's, had been torn by the years of separation. "Max," Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with sadness and understanding, "I know you've been waiting for this, but I need you to know, no matter what happens, I'm always here. I'll always be by your side." Max looked at her, his eyes filled with love, and gave a small wag of his tail. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. She knew that Max's love for her was unwavering, and she understood that no matter what happened with David, that bond could never be broken. As the evening drew to a close, Max lay beside Sarah, his body relaxed but his mind still processing the whirlwind of emotions he had just experienced. Sarah, too, felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Max had found his way back to his past, but the future was still a question. What would their lives look like now? Could Max truly forgive the years of abandonment? And what did that mean for his future with Sarah? Days passed since Max had reunited with David. The initial joy of the reunion began to settle into something more complicated, more uncertain. Max, despite his unyielding loyalty, found himself torn between his past with David and his present with Sarah, the woman who had been his constant companion through thick and thin. Sarah, for her part, had accepted the reunion with grace, but the unresolved tension lingered in the air. Max was more than just a pet to Sarah. He was her family. She had watched him grow from a playful pup into the strong, brave dog he was today, and his actions, especially in saving Daisy, had solidified his place in her heart. But now, she was faced with a dilemma. David had returned, and while Sarah could see the love and regret in his eyes, there was something unsettling about the way he had reappeared. Max's affection for Sarah had never wavered, but the presence of his original owner, David, stirred something deep inside him, a desire to reconnect with the person he had lost. It was clear that Max loved Sarah dearly, but there was a part of him that needed to understand whether he could truly find peace with David's return. Max's days were filled with inner conflict. He would follow Sarah around the house, his eyes constantly seeking her approval. But there was something different about his demeanor. It wasn't the playful energy he used to have. There was a quiet yearning in his movements, a look of hesitation that Sarah couldn't ignore. It was as though Max was stuck between two worlds, unsure of where his loyalty truly lay. One crisp morning, Sarah took Max out for their usual walk in the park, hoping the fresh air would lift his spirits. But today, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The park, which had once been a sanctuary for the two of them, now seemed like a battleground. Every time Sarah glanced at Max, she could see the conflict in his eyes. His love for her was clear, but the weight of his past with David seemed to be pulling at him. As they walked, Sarah noticed David at a distance, sitting on a bench by the park's lake. He was looking down, his hands resting on his knees, as if waiting for something. It struck Sarah in that moment just how much time had passed since Max and David had been apart. She couldn't deny the bond they once shared, but it was hard not to feel the sting of being left out of that connection. She had been the one there for Max all these years, and now she was forced to face the reality of what David's return meant for her relationship with Max. Max stopped in his tracks, his body tense. He looked at Sarah for a brief moment, his tail still, and then his gaze shifted to David. The conflict in his eyes was undeniable. Max hesitated, caught between the woman who had been his everything and the man he had spent so many years waiting for. His body trembled slightly, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. Max, Sarah said softly, crouching down to his level, her voice gentle but filled with concern. She placed a hand on his head, her fingers brushing through his fur. "You don't have to choose, Max. You'll always be my boy, no matter what." But Max didn't seem to hear her. He took a slow step toward David, his body moving forward as if drawn by an invisible force. Sarah's heart clenched as she watched him go, her stomach twisting with the unspoken question. What did this mean for them? David's eyes met Max's as the dog approached him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The two of them stood there, locked in a silent communication, as though trying to understand each other once again. Max's tail, still hesitant, slowly began to wag. His body relaxed, if only for a moment, and he leaned into David, nuzzling him gently. Sarah watched the reunion unfold before her eyes, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to be happy for Max, wanted to see him reconnect with the man who had been a part of his life, but there was a deep pain in her chest. She had never imagined a time when she would have to share Max, the one constant in her life, with someone else. David knelt down, his hand reaching for Max's head, his fingers trembling as he touched the dog's fur. His voice cracked as he spoke, barely audible. "I've missed you so much, buddy. I thought I'd never see you again. I've been looking for you all this time." Max let out a soft whine, nuzzling David's hand as though trying to reassure him. His loyalty was clear. Max had never forgotten the man who had once been his whole world. Sarah stood in the distance, her heart torn. The connection between Max and David was undeniable, but she couldn't help but feel like an outsider in that moment. Max had found the person he thought he had lost forever, and the bond they shared was strong, a bond that couldn't easily be broken. David stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Max. "I never should have left," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I hurt you, but I swear, I'll never leave you again." Sarah could see the sincerity in David's eyes, but the truth was undeniable. Max was caught between two worlds. He loved Sarah, but he had spent so many years searching for David, for his lost past. Sarah realized that Max needed time to reconcile these feelings. She couldn't force him to choose, and maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. "Max," Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's okay. I understand." But Max didn't hear her. He was focused on David, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and love. Sarah felt her heart breaking as she watched the two of them, knowing that this was the beginning of a journey she hadn't expected to take. Max, finally turning back towards Sarah, gave her a soft look. His tail wagged, but there was something in his eyes, a plea, perhaps that Sarah couldn't ignore. It was as though he was asking for her understanding, asking for her to let him go. And in that moment, Sarah knew that this wasn't just about Max reuniting with David. It was about Max finding peace, finding closure, and being able to move forward without the pain of the past weighing him down. "I'll always love you, Max," Sarah said softly, her heart breaking, but her voice steady. "No matter where you go, you'll always be my dog." Max turned back to David one last time, his decision made. But he would carry Sarah's words with him, knowing that, no matter what, she would always be there. And with that, Max took the first step in his journey back to the man he had waited for, knowing that the road ahead was uncertain, but also knowing that Sarah's love would never fade. The days after Max's reunion with David felt strange for Sarah. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her unsure of her place in Max's life. The bond between them had always been so strong, so simple. But now, with David back, Sarah was forced to face an uncomfortable truth. Max was torn between his past and his present. He had spent years searching for David, and now that he had found him, she couldn't deny that Max's loyalty to her was being tested. Max, who had once been so devoted to Sarah, now spent more time with David. Sarah noticed the way Max's eyes would light up whenever David spoke to him, how his tail wagged more eagerly in David's presence. It was hard not to feel left behind. She had given Max everything. And yet, now she was uncertain of where she stood in his world. But Sarah also understood that this reunion was inevitable. Max had always been David's dog, and despite everything that had happened, the bond they shared was undeniable. Sarah could see it in the way Max responded to David, how he followed him around, how his energy seemed to return when he was near. She knew this moment would come, and yet it didn't make it any easier to accept. One evening, as Sarah sat in the living room, watching Max and David interact, she couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. She had always been Max's world, and now she was sharing him with someone else. Her heart ached, but she knew she couldn't force Max to choose between her and David. She had to let him make his own decision, even if it meant stepping aside. That night, after a quiet dinner, Sarah took Max for their usual walk, the same route they had taken for years. Max walked beside her, his steps slower than usual, as if sensing her sadness. Sarah's hand rested lightly on his back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. Max, ever the loyal companion, seemed distant, as though he was waiting for something. As they walked in silence, Max suddenly stopped. His ears pricked. Sarah looked down at him, confused. Then, she followed his gaze. In the distance, just at the edge of the park, she saw David, standing near the old oak tree that Max and Sarah used to visit. The man stood still, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the ground. There was a sadness in his posture, something that Sarah couldn't ignore. Max tugged at the leash, pulling Sarah toward David, as if drawn to him by some invisible force. Sarah hesitated but then followed, her steps slow. She had to admit, the sight of David so close, yet so far away, stirred something inside her. She didn't know what she expected from this moment, but she knew it was something she had to face. When they reached David, he turned to look at Sarah and Max. There was no immediate greeting, no warm embrace. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, as if David had been waiting for this very moment, this very conversation. Max stood between them, his head low, his tail still. He didn't know what to do. His heart was divided, his mind a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He looked from Sarah to David, silently asking for guidance. David spoke first, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "Sarah, I know this isn't easy. I've spent so many years searching for Max, and now that I've found him, I'm not sure what to do. I didn't want to hurt you, but I know I've caused so much pain. I don't want to take Max from you. He's been with you for so long." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, her gaze never leaving David. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the regret and the love he still held for Max. But she also knew that her relationship with Max had evolved. She had been his constant, his home, and the thought of losing that connection was unbearable. "I don't want to take him from you either, David," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "Max is his own dog. He has his own heart, his own mind. I just want what's best for him." David nodded, his eyes sad. "I know. And I want him to be happy. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I want to be a part of his life again, if he'll let me." Max took a few cautious steps forward, standing at David's feet. His eyes were wide, searching David's face as though looking for something he couldn't quite explain. There was a part of him that was still the dog who had waited for David for so many years, but there was also a part of him that belonged to Sarah. The two worlds collided, and Max was caught in the middle. Sarah knelt down beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. "Max," she whispered, her voice full of love, "I've always loved you, and no matter what, you'll always be my dog. I just want you to be happy." Max turned to look at her, his eyes soft and filled with trust. He stepped forward, gently nuzzling her hand, his tail wagging ever so slightly. It was as if he were saying, "I'm still here. I still love you." David watched this silent exchange with a deep sense of guilt. He had left Max once, and now he was here asking for a second chance. But he understood that things could never be the same. Max had found his place with Sarah, and no matter how much David wanted to be a part of his life again, he knew he couldn't force that connection. "I think Max has made his choice," Sarah said softly, looking up at David. "He'll always be yours, but he has a life with me now." David's shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, he looked broken. But then, he straightened up and nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I understand. I'm not asking you to give him up. I just wanted to see him one more time, to know he's okay. That's enough for me." Max, still by Sarah's side, looked up at both of them, his tail giving one last wag. It was a sign of closure, of reconciliation. Max had made his decision, and it was clear. He was with Sarah, and that was where he belonged. David stepped back, his hands held up in surrender. "Take care of him, Sarah. I'm glad he found someone who loves him." And with that, David turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Sarah stood there, holding Max, her heart heavy but filled with relief. Max had found his place in the world, and now, so had she. She had always been his home. But now, she realized, Max was her home too. As they walked back to the house, Max looked up at her with adoring eyes, his body close to hers. The path ahead would not be without its challenges, but for now, Sarah and Max knew that no matter what happened, they had each other. The days following David's departure left Sarah in a state of quiet reflection. The whirlwind of emotions that had overwhelmed her just days before now settled into something deeper, an understanding that she hadn't expected to find. Max, her faithful companion, had been torn between two worlds. Yet, despite the complexity of their reunion with David, Max had shown Sarah, in his silent, loyal way, exactly what he needed her. And in turn, Sarah had realized that the bond they shared had been stronger than any past, any separation. Max had come home to her, and their relationship was far from over. As Sarah and Max walked through the park, the crisp morning air carrying a quiet serenity, Sarah felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for the past few weeks. The park, with its paths lined by trees that had begun to change color with the season, felt familiar once again, like the place she and Max had always known safe, full of memories. Max, walking contentedly by her side, had returned to his old self, the one Sarah had known before everything had become so complicated. His energy was brighter now, his steps more assured. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she glanced at him. Max's tail wagged energetically, and he looked up at her every few seconds, his eyes as full of affection as they had been the day they first met. She had been uncertain about what Max's reunion with David would mean. The ache in her chest, the fear of losing him, even if just a little, had been palpable. But now, after some time and reflection, she realized that their love wasn't something that could be easily fractured. Max had a place in her heart that no one else could fill, just as she had a place in his. Their bond had endured separation, uncertainty, and fear, and it had only grown stronger. Max's loyalty was never in question, nor was Sarah's love for him. The fact that Max had spent so many years searching for David, and yet still came back to her, spoke volumes about his heart, and Sarah's own heart filled with pride. As the weeks passed, Sarah made a decision that would change everything for her and Max. They would move. Not far, but enough to start anew, to build on the foundation they had created together, away from the lingering presence of David's return. She realized it was time for a fresh start, a place where Max could thrive without the emotional ties to his past. Sarah found a small, charming house just outside of town, nestled in a peaceful neighborhood. It was quiet, with green gardens and a large backyard where Max could run freely. The house wasn't much, but it had everything they needed: a safe, quiet place to heal, to grow, and to forge new memories. Max seemed to know that something was different about this place, too. He would dart around the yard, chasing his favorite ball, his energy boundless. But there was also a certain calm that settled over him here, a calm that Sarah could feel in her own bones. The change was good for both of them. They were free to live their lives without the weight of the past hanging over them. Days turned into weeks, and as Sarah settled into her new home, the peace she had longed for began to take root. She spent time volunteering at a local animal shelter, using her experience to help rescue dogs find their forever homes. Max accompanied her on many of her visits, offering his quiet, reassuring presence to the other animals and their soon-to-be owners. Sarah had always been passionate about helping animals, and now, with Max by her side, she felt more purpose-driven than ever before. One afternoon, as Sarah worked on organizing the shelter's adoption event, she sat on a bench, her eyes scanning the busy activity around her. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws. He had been such a good dog, always content to be by her side, and she was reminded once more of how lucky she was to have him in her life. A young couple approached her, holding a small, timid dog in their arms. Sarah smiled warmly at them, offering her help. The dog, a small terrier mix, was shaking with fear. It was clear that this little one had been through a lot in his short life. Sarah knelt down, her hands gently reaching for the dog, who immediately responded with cautious trust. "This one's a little shy, but he has so much potential," Sarah explained, her voice soft and reassuring. "He just needs someone who understands him." The couple nodded, their faces filled with concern and compassion. "We've been looking for a dog for a while, and he's exactly what we've been searching for. But we're a little nervous. We don't know if we can help him." Sarah smiled and placed a reassuring hand on the couple's shoulder. "It's okay. Take your time. The right dog finds the right person. And sometimes they just need someone to help them take that first step." Max, sensing the tension in the air, stood up and trotted over to the couple. The little terrier looked up at him, his eyes widening with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Max sat beside the couple, his presence calm and steady, as if to say, "I understand." The couple looked at each other and then back at Max, smiling. "He seems so at ease," the woman said, her voice filled with wonder. "Do you think he could be the one?" Max turned to the little terrier, who was now cautiously sniffing Max's paw. The terrier's tail wagged ever so slightly, and Sarah could see the spark of trust begin to form in the dog's eyes. "I think he's ready," Sarah replied softly, looking down at Max. "And so are you." That day, the couple adopted the terrier, and as they walked away, the dog looking back at Sarah with a quiet sense of relief. Sarah knew that she had done something good. She had given another dog a chance at a better life, and in that moment, it felt as if the circle had been completed. Max had been the one who had brought her to this place, this new life, and now, together, they were helping other animals find their way, just as Max had once found his way back to her. Later that evening, as Max and Sarah relaxed in their new home, the quiet hum of the world outside began to settle. Max lay beside her on the couch, his head resting on her lap, as Sarah gently scratched behind his ears. The peace between them felt more complete than it ever had before. They had both come so far. Max had searched for years, enduring hardship and loneliness, and now, in the quiet of their home, he was finally at peace. There would be no more searching for a place to belong. He had found it, with Sarah, and they would remain together. His loyalty had carried him through, and now, his heart had found its home. Max's tail wagged lazily as he drifted to sleep beside Sarah, and for Sarah, the warmth of that bond filled her with a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. The future was open before them, full of promise and possibilities. Together, they had made it through the storm, and now they were ready to embrace the calm. 1 year later, Max and Sarah were still living their peaceful life together in their cozy home, and the foundation Sarah had started in Max's name was thriving. Max had become a local hero, but to Sarah, he was always the same, her loyal companion. The dog who had found his way back to her, and the one who had shown her the true meaning of love and devotion. The sun set on another peaceful evening, casting a warm glow over their lives. Max's journey had been long, but it had led them both to a place of true peace. And as Sarah watched him sleep, content and at ease, she knew that together, they had found something far more valuable than anything else, the unbreakable bond that would carry them through anything life had to offer. 1 year had passed since the day Max had found his way back to Sarah. The journey he had undertaken, driven by a bond so deep that nothing could sever it, had come full circle. No longer was Max the lost dog, wandering in search of his past. He had found his way home, not just physically, but emotionally, too. The deep loneliness that had consumed him for so long had been replaced with a peace that enveloped him and Sarah in the warmth of their shared life. Sarah sat at the kitchen table one quiet morning, sipping her coffee as she gazed out the window at the morning sunlight casting long shadows across the backyard. It was a beautiful sight, the kind that made everything seem perfect. The birds were chirping, the trees were lush and green, and Max was laying at her feet, his head resting lazily on the floor as he snored lightly. There was a contentment in Sarah's heart, an easy peace she hadn't known before. The tension and uncertainty of the past had melted away. Her life now felt full, not just because of Max, but because of the way their lives had intertwined, how their bond had grown and solidified in ways that defied explanation. Max wasn't just a dog to Sarah. He was her family, her protector, her companion. Their love was mutual, not just one-sided. Max had saved her, just as much as she had saved him. Sarah smiled, running her fingers through Max's fur as he stirred awake. His eyes flicked up to meet hers. A slow wag of his tail, the only sign of his gratitude for her touch. There was no need for words between them. They had learned everything they needed to know about each other through quiet moments like this when words weren't necessary, when their bond spoke louder than anything else. As Sarah set down her cup of coffee, she stood up and walked toward the door. The day ahead was full of promise. She had an appointment at the animal shelter to check in on the new animals who had been rescued, and later, she was meeting with a group of volunteers from her rescue foundation to discuss future projects. Max, as always, would be by her side. He had become a beacon for the work she did in the community, not just for the love he had given her, but for the inspiration he provided to others. People knew his story, how he had searched for years, determined and unyielding, and how he had finally found his way back to Sarah, the one person who truly understood him. As they stepped outside together, Sarah looked down at Max. He stood tall beside her, tail wagging gently, as if ready for another adventure. It wasn't just the bond between them that had flourished. The community that Sarah and Max had built was thriving. The foundation they had started in Max's name had grown far beyond their expectations. It had become a sanctuary for lost animals, a place where people could come together to rescue, rehabilitate, and rehome pets in need. Max had become a symbol of hope, not only for animals but for humans as well. The story of his unwavering loyalty had touched the hearts of many. He had shown people the power of never giving up, of the strength found in love and persistence. Max's story had inspired countless others to take action, whether by adopting animals, volunteering at shelters, or simply raising awareness for the importance of animal welfare. As Sarah walked through the shelter later that afternoon, greeting the volunteers and checking on the animals, she felt a quiet sense of pride. The foundation had helped rehome hundreds of animals in the last year, and they had begun collaborating with other shelters to create a network of support for rescued pets. Every dog, every cat, every animal that found its way into a new home was a small victory. Max trotted alongside her, his eyes scanning the room, content in the knowledge that he had played a part in something so much larger than himself. His tail wagged as he passed by the cages, each one filled with hopeful eyes looking up at him. The animals recognized him, some wagging their tails in greeting, others sniffing at him with curiosity. Max stopped to sniff at one of the cages, a small puppy looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Sarah couldn't help but smile at the sight. Max had become a symbol of safety for these animals, just as he had been for her. He was their protector, their guide, just as he had been for her all those years. Sarah knew that, with Max by her side, they could continue to help even more animals find their way to loving homes. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, updates, and new plans for the shelter. Max stayed close to Sarah the entire time, never straying far from her side. As they sat down to discuss the future of the foundation, Sarah looked at the volunteers around the table and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had all come together because of one simple idea that love and dedication could make a difference. And with Max's story as the driving force, they were making that difference every single day. As the day drew to a close, Sarah and Max returned home, tired but content. The evening was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to just relax. She sat on the couch, Max curled up beside her, and watched as the sky outside darkened and the stars began to appear. Max's soft breathing filled the silence, and Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. Max had found his way home. He had searched for years, endured hardships, and faced countless challenges. But now, he was exactly where he belonged, and so was Sarah. Together, they had found something more important than any material success. They had found a home, a purpose, and each other. The future was bright for them. They had more to accomplish, more animals to save, more lives to change. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah knew that they were ready for whatever came next. Max had shown her what true loyalty and love meant, and in turn, she had given him a life filled with the same devotion. As the night grew deeper, Sarah leaned down and kissed Max's head. His eyes fluttered open, and he gazed up at her with a look of pure contentment. There was no need for words. They both knew that they had everything they needed right here. 1 year later, Max's story continued to inspire not only the people who had followed his journey, but also those who had joined Sarah's mission. The foundation had expanded, helping even more animals find their way home. Max was still by Sarah's side, a constant reminder of the power of love, loyalty, and the impact one dog could have on the world. And as they walked together through the park, Max's tail wagging happily, Sarah knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Max had shown her the true meaning of family, and as long as they were together, they would always have a home. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that love and loyalty can overcome any obstacle, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.